Hi, this is Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull, and you're listening to Dave J on KCLA.
Ian, how are you doing?
Well, I'm doing not too bad for an old guy celebrating his 40th anniversary, but if I ever feel a little bit down in the dumps or not up to the mark, I just think of it as my 39th anniversary, then I feel like a young guy again.
40 years in the music business is a long career. I was wondering, when you first started, did you envision making a career of music, or was it just something you were doing as a hobby, which, you know, later took off in a big way?
Well, like many of my peers from that era in the mid to late 60s, I was an art school student, and I think the association between British art students and popular music was notably goes back to people like Eric Burdon and in the Animals in early days, and John Lennon of the Beatles, and people like Syd Barrett of Pink Floyd, and it's all, and Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones, just all sorts of people who came from an art school background but ended up being musicians, and that's kind of what happened to me too, in the sense that I was interested in music, but it really took a hold when I was at art school, at a point when the awful reality of the difficulty in earning a living as a painter and the probability that I would end up being an art school teacher just to earn a crust, that kind of got home, and I decided that really if I was going to take that kind of a risk with my future, I might as well go all the way and risk being a musician. And so I took off to London in end of 67, and by the beginning of 68, I was playing the flute on stage at the Marquee Club in the early Jethro Tull. And 7 months after picking up the flute, we made our first record, and the rest is, well, at least a personal history, if not ranking in world terms. It's my story. Yeah. And I'm the original member from the band who still plays today.
And did you have a history of music? Were your family very musical, or was it just something you picked up at art school? And what type of music were you listening to when you were, growing up?
Well, my family were not musical as far as I'm aware, and I don't recall any members of the family who were, or at least not blood relatives who were musicians. So it really was at the age of about 6 or 7, I remember hearing my father's big band records. He had a collection of 78 big band things, Duke Ellington and Count Basie and Glenn Miller and that kind of stuff. It was kind of wartime USA big band music. And later, when I was 9, I think I heard Elvis Presley for the first time, and I recognized something familiar in that early rock music, which I couldn't identify. I can now. It was the flattened fifth. It's the note of the blues scale that you find so common in jazz and blues, and it's very rarely found in that kind of a context in classical or folk music. It seems quite peculiar to Black American music, and that's the one thing that I suppose I got hooked on, was that bluesy feel. So as a teenager, I wasn't listening to Cliff Richard or Billy Fury or Marty Wilde or any of our Elvis impersonators that we had over in the UK. I was listening to Muddy Waters and Sonny Boy Williamson and Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee, and the only white man in the pack, Mose Allison, who was a kind of quirky singer-songwriter pianist who I think probably was an influence on quite a few people back in the UK in the 60s.
Looking back over your career, is there anything that you think you would do differently? Any decisions that you made that you wish you hadn't, or things that you didn't do that you wish you would have done? Well,
sometimes I regret parting with my 1960s Fender Stratocaster, which I did. Probably that would be worth many tens of thousands of dollars today, but I traded it in for a $50 flute back in 1967.
I think it might have paid off.
It seemed like a pretty raw deal, but on the other hand, I'm unlikely to complain. I think my $50 flute served me well for a few years. ironically the same make of $50 student flute that James Galway first began on a few years before I did, back in Belfast. And so one thing we do share in common is that we both began playing the Selma Gold Seal student flute. And his memories of it are probably on a par with mine, but I guess he's right in saying that it's not the flute. It doesn't have to be an expensive one to sound great, but it does have to be of at least a kind of professional, workable standard. And a lot of really primitive student flutes are not the best way to start. However, he and I both persevered in our different ways and managed to make a living at it.
And you're one of very few flautists in rock music. Did you get many requests for session work or guest appearances when you first started?
Well, yes, but it's always much more fun to do things. I mean, I don't actually do so many things these days because I think people realize that I'm busy and working elsewhere. But frequently I have and still occasionally do play with, usually with unknown folks who making their first record, or it's kind of nice to associate with younger and newer artists. And I've played on quite a few things over the years, but nothing that I haven't played on a Pink Floyd album or an Elton John album, or nothing. Nobody really famous has ever asked me to play on their record, but it's something I've in a way been kind of grateful for, because I don't really like the idea someone would be asking me to play the flute because they want to put my indelible stamp or style on their record. Because when it comes to playing on somebody else's music, I always feel I've got to look at it almost as if it's my music and try and find a part that fits, a part that is appropriate and isn't necessarily just about stamping your authority on somebody else's work. You have to be a little bit more sensitive and amenable to the twists and turns of their music, and not overcook it, not overdo it.
Right.
So I've played on lots of people's records, but not too many folks that you would have heard of.
And now, over the years, there's been various formats of the band, I guess, different styles. Started off with blues, and then you've had folk and progressive rock. Do you have a particular favourite era for Jethro Tull?
Well, there's, having come from a background of blues and jazz music, I quickly started to lend an ear to folk music, classical music, Asian music. I mean, it's by the time I was 21 years old, I was listening to a whole lot of different things, and so my influences really are very eclectic, and I think that shows in Jethro Tull's music. Plus, there have been so many members of the band over the years that, 26 at the last count, that they've all brought with them their own musical influences and their styles and their preferences to the arrangement and the sound of the band. So Jethro Tull is really very varied, and I think, from the point of view of playing live in concert and trying to satisfy an audience, it's virtually impossible to please all of the people all the time. You can be pretty sure that there's going to be a bunch of folk who think of Jethro Tull as perhaps the hard rock Jethro Tull, or those that think of Jethro Tull as the folk rock Jethro Tull, or the classical crossover rock Jethro Tull, or the bluesy Jethro Tull, or it goes on and on. So you can't really do anything except try to cover and represent the different styles at some point during a show. And with that in mind, it really is, it is picking one or two songs that fall into what I see as being the different stylistic categories, and just trying to give a reasonable representation of where we've been at different points in different years.
And over the course of your career, what would you say you were proudest of?
It's probably serving as a little beacon of hope to a number of artists who feel hemmed in and constrained by the economic and stylistic necessities facing young musicians today. I think the one thing I would feel proud of is to serve as a little example of being able to do what you believe in and what you want, and carve out a niche for yourself and and a decent living if you're good at doing it. But I think the pressures on young musicians today is like never before. You really do have to toe the line and fit into certain very, very tightly defined categories of music, and you have to do things in a certain way, and you have to, I suppose, even the pressure to be, to dress, to behave, to look, to sound like the cliches of pop and rock music. It's overwhelming. And I would just like to think that maybe we serve as an example that should maybe offer some hope to young musicians, that once in a while you can buck the trends and ignore style and fashion and still get ahead in spite of it.
Yeah. One of the things that I've noticed over the years, you get a lot of bands coming and going. I recently had the pleasure of interviewing Fish, who of course performed with you at Edinburgh recently. And with Marillion, they supported you, I think, at the Theaksons Festival, and then you played with them at Milton Keynes Garden Party gig. I was just wondering whether, and Fish was saying that, one of the great pleasures in his job was he got to meet and got to play with people that he'd admired for so long. I was wondering if there were any musicians that you really admired that you would like to work with or you'd like to perform with?
Well, again, we do work with a lot of young, fresh-faced musicians in our travels, because it's quite common for Jethro Tull to have, rather than an opening act, to have a special guest who may or may not be somebody known. A lot of people know who Fish is, but they might not know some of the other guests that appeared with us on our UK tour. It's always nice to work with people and bring them onto the stage within the warm and safe cocoon of a Jethro Tull concert, because they get audience credibility immediately when you introduce them and bring them onto the stage and perform with them. So, something that I've done for quite a long time, and more so as of more recent years. But there are always people that it's great to work with. I mean, one of our other guests on the UK tour we just did a couple of months ago was a young folk artist called Seth Lakeman, who's very popular in the UK and to some extent in Europe, as a prize-winning example of the new folk movement in the UK, and great example of someone that it's nice for people like me to have the opportunity to play with. In a few months' time, I'll be working with a young lady who's becoming very well known in her own right. She's Anushka Shankar, the daughter of Ravi Shankar, and we have some concerts scheduled together in India and Dubai and Singapore later in the year. And so I'm writing some music at the moment that hopefully she will like enough to want to play with me, and we'll see where that one goes.
And as far as Jethro Tull, are there any plans for another Jethro Tull album?
Well, there are always plans for another Jethro Tull album. There are always some songs that are in a current state of either being recorded or arranged or being worked on, and that's something that when we have the opportunity to go into the studio, we will continue with. But there have been, in the last year or two, a number of little unfortunate delays in our schedule due to some members of the band not being available due to other commitments or in a couple of cases having had some minor surgery that they had to attend to, and this coming year I know is also going to be quite difficult, because much of the time that is set aside later in the year is going to get used up by some folks going on with their other projects in music and vacation time and so on and so forth. So it's actually looking a bit bleak this year again. I'm sad to say that it doesn't look like. I mean, my studio time will probably be spent alone working in the studio rather than with the band as a whole, just because the guys have all got some other plans and things that they want to get going on. We're on the road a long time, and a lot of the year working together. You've got to create some space to do your other things, and all of the guys have, apart from family commitments, they have other projects and other musical activities they like to be involved in, so you've got to make sure you leave a little slack for them, and they want to take advantage of that in the off months later this year.
Thanks very much, Ian.
Nice to talk to you.
Okay, have a great tour.